welcome to Would You Consider? This is the podcast where Mark Dangelo and I sit down and talk about the topics that we all should probably be talking about in business today. Today, data meshes. Now, if you've watched our show in the past, you know that we've already talked about data privacy. We've introduced that. We've also talked about data governance. But now we are joined by Mark Dangelo to talk about data meshes. And Mark, first of all, thanks for being here.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
But second of all, I don't even know exactly what we're talking about here. Introduce us to this.
Data mesh was a concept that hit the enterprise mindset maybe about 2018, 2017, somewhere in that time frame. And that's because the technology has allowed us to progress to this. And its genesis is actually something that was originated back in the 1980s. So this is not necessarily a new concept, but we have the capabilities now to actually begin to implement it. And some major vendors like IBM and Oracle have introduced products around this that allow enterprises to take a broad look at their data. And years ago, we used to call this enterprise data management, EDM, right? So EDM was a concept that was based upon integrating the metadata, integrating things across enterprises, but it was built on common centralized databases, if you will. Today, data meshes and our technology and the ability for networks and ubiquitous connectivity over Wi-Fi and things like that, secure connections, allow us to create these virtualized spider webs, for lack of something better. I can begin to talk about systems and they can be the levels that go here, but I want to interconnect all these silos, these applications, these systems. How do I do that? In the past, we used to do it just through APIs. We do an ETL, an extraction transformation and load, or an extraction load transformation some people use. They bring it in and they would port it into the databases, and they do it these pipes, and they could do it, typically they'd sync them up or whatever, but they were massive volumes. Today, the technology and the ability to produce the security, the immutability of those particular data allow us to go into those crosshairs of that spider web. And we can now begin to build virtualized pipes without having to bring all that information into our enterprise. And what that does, especially with rising cloud cost of storage, and people are now beginning to take a note that, maybe in a lot of cases, up to 50% of their budgets are being consumed by cloud vendors. They're beginning to say, how am I using that information? Why am I replicating it? So a data mesh provides a cross-enterprise and even outside the enterprise view of linking information into a common viewpoint. And it allows for things like data democratization. I can get to that data regardless of what it is. It has a shelf life. And oh, by the way, I can ethically source that because I may not need to keep that into my centralized systems because maybe the consumer controls it. Maybe a government agency controls it, or whoever. I don't need to actually replicate all that information, because as soon as I replicate it, that says, how am I keeping that up to date? And what's happening with the transition? And then how do I audit it? And all those wonderful things of regulatory compliance and reporting come into bear. But if I create this mesh, and again, there are tools, there are vendors that are doing this. Tableau is another one that is doing this. I can begin to say, I don't need to have all that responsibility. I can build that spider web, and I can not just build it in 2 dimensions, I can actually create it in 3 dimensions. And this is where the real beauty of leveraging your data comes in, because the more I can leverage data, the more my costs come and my profitability rises. So my margins begin to increase from a corporate CEO standpoint, as well as I have more accurate information. I can understand the system of record. I can go back to the original version versus saying, well, how many times has that been manipulated or transformed along the way? Is that the actual version of the truth? Because that's where we get into trouble as enterprises. We're reporting on information that doesn't exist. And think about it, regulatory compliance. I can go back to the original source, or I can go back to the original digital data wallets. I can do all sorts of things that lower my cost, improve my accuracy, and then provide the consumer and my overseers, my regulators, if you will, in a highly regulated industry. I can provide them a common version of the truth with less errors and less rework and less liability.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, normally at this point in the show, I ask you why now, why this is important now, but you've already given us some really good reasons, right? You've talked about reducing storage costs. You've talked about better analytics for better decision-making. what else is there that should be compelling CEOs to have these conversations with their teams now?
Well, the obvious thing is you begin to reduce the complexity in the processes. So in essence, a lot of times we institute policies and processes into an organization because we're trying to get the data where we want it. We have to add another set of steps. What happens with the digital meshes and the larger, remember I said multidimensional, this is where we start talking about digital fabrics, which is more of a larger scale of integration of meshes. When we begin to do this, we can start to eliminate the processes. We can shorten the time duration for the customers. We can improve the quality of care, let's say if we're in healthcare or what have you. We can begin to get rid of things that really added very little value. We often call that what's the value prop, in the business side. It changes our business model and our dynamic. It may change the way we use our channels or how we reach out and the number of resources. It begins to completely streamline the process. And if you think of why digital meshes are gaining such great popularity in the last 12 months. And again, JP Morgan started some of this foundation back in 2021. They're like, oh, who does this? Well, there are people that have published on this and that are really investing in it. But what's happening is people are beginning to look at this and say, I can change the way I do business. I can get a competitive advantage. I can shorten the duration. I can make a distinction from a commodity industry, like, a commodity product to some degree, different financial products, and we could pick on many of them in the retail and lending side. And I can say, if I could get that digital mesh, then if I understand, let's say, a financial supply chain or a healthcare supply chain or even a manufacturing, I can say, what do the people on the end really need? And I can begin to back into that. So I can traverse the supply chain. And this is where things that you're seeing also in the industry, like digital twins and the ability to project and do what if analysis, data meshes and data fabrics are key to that endeavor. And it's really has a way to now transform the enterprise into a different model. And if you're looking at a comprehensive digital world, which is what we're in today, a native digital, you have to realize that many of the things on privacy and governance that we talked about before, these things were just paper-based systems that we automated. We talk about digital transformation, that's a great topic for the industry and great for consultants. But, those were really about trying to automate paper-based systems and capture that information digitally versus like an OCR screen scrape of an Adobe product and all that good stuff. Now we can begin to say, I can natively get that information. What does that mean? That means I don't have to replicate all this stuff. That doesn't mean I have to have all these obsolete processes that manipulate it. I can go back to the native digital source because we are in a truly digital set of economies. And so a lot of this reworks our whole business mindset. And that's where the value of digital meshes comes in. And it's not a explosion, here it is, let's boil the oceans kind of a mindset. It's a stepwise process that has to be taken, but you have to have the digital maturity of things like privacy and governance to be able to even start talking about digital meshes or data meshes and data fabrics.
All right, excellent. We're already talking to potential guests for future shows that are going to help us go deep on things like data privacy and data governance, which we covered before. But on this data meshes, talk to us about how those initial conversations should go and who should be involved. Is this something that they can buy off the shelf? Are there vendors that do this? Do they have to do it? How does it work?
There is a growing list of vendors. Many of them are in a startup stage, but there are also some very established vendors. IBM, for instance, they've got a great set of product lines to do this. And they've invested the time and effort. Microsoft is another one that's doing it with certain aspects of their clouds and capabilities. So it doesn't necessarily preclude the small versus the large. The way you start with that is saying, how can I rework? If I have a strong data governance and data privacy, then the next question is, where am I sourcing all that information from? What do I need? And that discussion then begins to automate a process by which you can construct this. Now, is there anything off the shelf today? I have not seen anything that is robust, but here's the caveat. People are, especially vendors, all the cloud vendors especially, are beginning to develop these industry clouds. And these industry clouds are taking a lot of the burden away from a digital mesh construction from ground zero. They are providing the foundation, how that information is used, the sharing among the industry, the set standards, all these wonderful things that we don't have to necessarily recreate. So by having these digital clouds that are industry specific and now applying the data mesh tools that, again, right now are fairly generic. Again, we're talking an evolution of about 5-6 years here at best in focus. Things are beginning to start developing in industry specific capabilities, healthcare, especially, and financial services. And so now, probably by 2024, I would guess you're going to see more vendors, more startups. We talk to people already that are beginning to look at this within things like, mortgage lending or consumer lending, and how can we begin to use a digital mesh to go across? Because from, let's say, a banking standpoint, that creates upselling and cross-selling and householding, if you were even any industry. So the short answer is there are nothing that is turnkey today. Most of these things are customized based upon your digital maturity level, but it is, people are beginning to work on this so that you can actually have off-the-shelf solutions, because standards exist in places like healthcare and financial services. And people are saying, I can overlay that. I can create you a system development kit, if you will, that applies to your enterprise, your organization, your line of business. So it is going to be an evolutionary process. It is still early in the cycle, but this is something that more and more people are going to be talking about, and more vendors are going to be beginning to offer, because they don't want to be left out. And you look at the large vendors, they have access to all this information. They just have not knitted it together. And that's what we're talking about here, is how do you knit that together from an industry level, a product and service line level? And that is the next generation of solutions that many people are going to be seeing.
Well, this is definitely going to be a topic I'm excited about going deep on. If you're doing anything with digital meshes today and you want to be on our show, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you about possibly going deep on how you are handling this in your business and your industry. As always, Mark, thank you for being with me today.
Thanks for having me. All right, take care.